The centennial of my father's retirement dinner felt like a crack in stone beneath my boots. I sat stiffly at the head of the table, my hands cupping the steaming cup of turf coffee, while he offered me a raised eyebrow. "Still playing physicist," he said, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. I saw how his eyes narrowed, not from disbelief, but from the spine inwned in questioning, though the warmth of his reflection in that crystal glass clung stubbornly. Around me, the family circled like chimpanzees guarding treasure, their laughter brittle, their backs slightly turned. They'd known since I was small enough to pilot a quantum model on a helium balloon. They'd observed the switch from fascination to condemnation, the shift from professional admiration to dismissal masked as condescension. They called my vision utopistic, unfathomable, a fantasy that predated the post-biz economy and the forgotten algorithms dangling like mosquitoes from a moth's damned wing. 5 years earlier, when I'd maxed out my scholarship funds to study quantum entanglement, they'd snuck out of my room at midnight, demanding I prove them wrong by debugging a breaker. "You'll fail," they'd chirped, "and poor disciplines don't bleed green." But when I returned to campus a decade later, standing before a university exhibit conceived in the collaborative chaos of pediatric neurochemistry, they'd still be whispering the same words, now softened by years into polite acknowledgments. How did I leave then? I vanished like a Higgs boson through a paper detector, leaving only a single dried flower, the kind that wilts but never scorches, a token of resilience. The call came in a dusty box labeled for finishing. My mother's vintage typewriter trembled in my grip as I opened it, her laughter echoing off peeling homework sheets. She'd expected me here, though I'd wanted to ask for help, for someone to replace the equations that couldn't touch the soil. Instead, she presented a board, a city map, solar panels wired overhead, a flock of quail harnessing wind currents to irrigate rooftops. Her skepticism turned to awe. Through her eyes I saw the flashes she'd witnessed, the same agitation, the same quiet intensity marring her voice when funding debates raged. "How'd you even do that?" she muttered. I described the quantum algorithms intertwined with permaculture principles, the ethical compromises made, the nights translating glimmering potentials into harvest tables. She didn't squint. She respected the ache in my stare. The second confrontation unfolded on a porch overlooking a murk of compost. They'd gathered after hours, lulled into complacency by the weight of the table's cargo, my labor. The air stiffened. My father slammed his hand on the oak-grafted leg, his knuckles whitening beneath his palm. "You think they'll hate you?" he asked, though his tone lacked venom. My mother fussed around the chair, her hands pressing into the fabric of her spider-embroidered blouse. I had to pour the bourbon I had finally managed to buy myself, not that it masked the flush in my face. "They want to drag us down," she said finally, her voice a fused wire of setbacks. "But look at it." She pointed to a sprawling plot, rows of kale and wheat clawing at the monsoon heat, a river of income now branching where only a handful had drowned. "They forget what we were told." The confrontation mounted like a gravitational pull. Mentions of the academy's dismissive remarks, the rival graduates who'd scoffed at my public lectures, the librarian's whispered indignation, all clustered into a cacophony. Then it happened. Grandmother recoiled as she pressed a note into my fist. "You became a means to heal things, not a monster for what you are." Her words cracked her fury into something almost tender, or maybe just exhaustion. They gathered like nests, hands available not to attack but to contain the fire still smoldering beneath our skin. My father stepped closer, his silhouette daunted in the twilight. "You weren't a fool," he said, the first raw honesty. I met his gaze for a heartbeat. The lights dimmed. And then, instead of rage, something heavier settled. The knowledge that their disappointment was a temporary cataract, once willed into view. The aftermath came swiftly. Tourists in tailored suits circled the plots. Crypto investors placed bid amounts. Landlords desired, abandoned, claims verified only by monarchies. Yet the toll remained. The weight of the crown tail, the compulsion to channel every shadow into growth. I retreated to the greenhouse, where a sprig of lavender whispered against my palm, its scent a counterpoint to the algae blooms thriving in the soil beneath. Here alone it bloomed, untethered by their expectations. The turning point came not in a flash, but in the slow, deliberate dismantling of the illusion that success equaled irrelevance. At my sister's graduation, where I'd secretly returned to nurture her fern plant in a corner desk, the girls gushed about discipline, though I knew better. What moment crystallized everything was when the mayor's aide, once a taunt, wandered in, handing me a box. Inside, a framed certificate, but beside it, a photo of my childhood class, eyes wide as stars, and a small vial of iridescent resin from my first campfire experiment. My mother placed it over my head. For every cornered dream, she said, the one that outlived it. Decades later, I would stand at the family's ancestral home, the same lily pools where pioneers once carved canvases into the earth, their fury mellowed into something like respect. The survivors would eventually glimpse the cracks I'd carved, abandoned wings, reimagined soil, a house not too ornate, but enough to rest upon, their modern cathedral of habit. Their thanks was no less thunderous than ours, yet tinged with a reverence different, gentler. That night, I lingered on the porch, the compass ticking lazily through the air. My family's dialogue softened, replacements weaving a tapestry of shared stories rather than critique. Later, you could still hear her voice, weathered and warm, recounting the fallout, yet the melody no longer carried finality. Instead, it soared into a chorus of gratitude, melancholy, and pride, a symphony unresolved but resolved. In those moments, I recognized the arc that had unfolded, from the shattered pieces of a life dismantled to the reassembly not by force, but by the unbearable truth that ruin and triumph could coexist within the same family, bound by echoes, yet still yearning to make life worth remembering another 1,000 times around. Karma's ledger incontestable. Some debts are settled by action, others by silence. Yet the redemption, once barred by illusion, now flows freely, a lesson etched not in what was lost, but what persisted, resilient, persistent, unbroken.